The hiss of the champagne bottle opening sounded like a starting pistol. A race I hadn't even known I was running had just ended, and I had lost. I stood at the edge of the boardroom, a ghost in my own victory, watching Jasper bask in the warm glow of the projector. On the screen behind him, my work, my soul, the Helios Tower. It was a self-sustaining vertical city, a marvel of biomechanics and recycled materials that I had spent 3 years of my life creating. 3 years of late nights, cold coffee, and a relentless, burning passion to build something that mattered. Now, Jasper was presenting it. My Jasper, not mine in any romantic sense, God no. He was my colleague, my senior in title only, a man who moved through the world of architecture with the slick, unearned confidence of a game show host. He pointed at the screen with a silver pen, his voice a smooth baritone that coated my designs in a layer of proprietary varnish. He used words like synergies and paradigm shift. He never used the word I, but he didn't have to. The way he stood, the way he gestured, the way the partners of Sterling and Croft looked at him, it was all implied. This was his triumph. My name was nowhere, not on the title slide, not in the presentation credits, not in the glossy brochures being passed around the heavy mahogany table. My knuckles were white where I gripped the thin stem of a champagne flute I hadn't touched. I could feel a quiet heat flush up my neck, a familiar burn of silent rage I had learned to swallow like a bitter pill. For years, this had been the arrangement. I was the architect, the engine, the one who could stare at a blank sheet of paper and see the future. Jasper was the face, the voice, the one who took my future and sold it as his own. He always said the same thing, a patronizing hand on my shoulder, a conspiratorial wink. Phoebe, you're just more valuable behind the scenes. You're the foundation. No one sees it, but everyone depends on it. He said it like he was giving me a compliment. For years, I think a part of me, a deeply naive and broken part, actually believed him. Mr. Sterling, the firm's patriarch, raised his glass to Jasper. He boomed, his jowls quivering with pride. For once again proving that Sterling and Croft is not just building structures, but building the future, the room erupted in applause. They all turned to Jasper. He smiled, a perfect, predatory smile, and nodded, accepting their praise as if it were his birthright. I clapped along with them. The sound of my own hands hitting each other felt foreign, a mechanical action disconnected from the screaming void that had just opened up in my chest. This time was different. This wasn't just another project, another stolen headline in an industry journal. Helios was my masterpiece. It was everything I knew, everything I believed about architecture as a force for good, distilled into one perfect design, and he had erased me from it completely. He caught my eye across the room. He gave me that little wink, the wink that said, "Thanks for the ammo, soldier. I'll take it from here." That's when the champagne flute in my hand started to tremble. It wasn't a violent shake, just a slight, almost imperceptible vibration, a physical manifestation of a fault line cracking deep within me. All the years of being patted on the head, of being called the workhorse while he was called the visionary, of pouring my life into blueprints that would carry his signature, it all coalesced into a single silent point of unbearable pressure. I could feel the thin glass threatening to shatter in my grip. I put the flute down on a nearby table with a soft click that no one heard. I turned, and without a word to anyone, I walked out of the boardroom. I didn't walk to my desk. I walked past it, past the framed awards on the wall that my work had won for the firm, past the sympathetic, knowing eyes of my assistant, Lena. I walked straight to the elevator, my heels clicking on the polished marble floor, a steady rhythmic beat counting down the final seconds of my time at Sterling and Croft. No call, no meeting, no thank you. I pushed the button for the ground floor. As the doors slid shut, sealing me in the quiet, sterile box, I made a decision. It wasn't about revenge. I told myself that, over and over. It wasn't about getting even. It was about correction. A market correction for my own soul. I was done being the foundation for someone else's monument. I was going to build my own, and I knew something that Jasper, in all his glorious public-facing ignorance, did not. The blueprint he was so proudly displaying. It was a beautiful, brilliant lie. It was a car without an engine, because the real genius of Helios, the proprietary methodology that made it all possible, the quiet, revolutionary formulas that made it sustainable and cost-effective, that wasn't on the firm's servers, it was on mine, and I had just walked out the door with it. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people celebrating your work, if you've ever been told you're more valuable in the shadows, then you know the unique kind of silence that follows a decision like that. It's a silence that is both terrifying and liberating. Do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe, because it helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. This story is for anyone who has ever decided to step out of the shadows and into their own light. The drive home was a blur. I remember the city lights smearing across my windshield like wet paint, the disembodied voice of the GPS telling me to turn left, turn right, as if I had any idea where I was going. My apartment, when I finally stumbled into it, felt like a stranger's house. The air was cold and still. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clatter echoing in the cavernous silence. For a moment, I just stood there in the dark, my hand still on the doorknob, my bag still slung over my shoulder. The adrenaline that had propelled me out of the office had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, aching cold. Then, the breakdown. It wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no throwing things. It was a quiet, internal collapse. I slid down the back of the door until I was sitting on the floor, my head in my hands, and I just deflated. The sheer weight of the last decade pressed down on me. It felt like I was at the bottom of the ocean. The pressure was immense, crushing the air from my lungs. A single hot tear traced a path through the makeup I'd put on that morning, a morning when I still had a flicker of hope that this time things would be different. My mind started to play a highlight reel of my own erasure, a film festival of humiliation. I remembered my very first project review with Jasper, 7 years ago. I designed a complex cantilevered balcony for a luxury condo. It was a difficult engineering puzzle, and I had solved it with an elegant, cost-effective solution. In the meeting, Jasper presented it. When the client asked a highly technical question about load-bearing tolerances, Jasper had just smiled and said, "I'll have my technical team send over the specs." He turned to me after the meeting, a smirk playing on his lips. "See, we're a team. You handle the numbers. I handle the people. It's the perfect partnership." I was too young, too eager to please, too indoctrinated with the idea of paying my dues, to see it for what it was, the blueprint for my own marginalization. Then came the waterfront pavilion, the project that won the firm its first major international award. My design, my sleepless nights wrestling with fluid dynamics and tidal corrosion. My name was in the internal submission documents, but when the article came out in Architectural Digest, it was a 2-page spread on Jasper Thorne's design philosophy. There was a picture of him, leaning against one of my support columns, looking thoughtful and brooding. The article mentioned his innate understanding of the dialogue between water and steel. I'd spent 6 months studying that dialogue. He'd spent an afternoon posing for the photographer. When I'd cautiously brought it up with Mr. Sterling, he'd waved a dismissive hand. "Phoebe, don't be so sensitive. A win for the firm is a win for everyone. Jasper is good with the press. It's his strength. Let him play to it." The memories kept coming, each one a small cut. There was the time he'd forgotten to invite me to a crucial client dinner, only to call me in a panic midway through, because he couldn't explain the HVAC system I'd designed. I'd had to walk him through it over the phone, standing in my pajamas in my kitchen, while he took the credit at a Michelin star restaurant. Or the time he'd publicly overruled my choice of a sustainable bamboo composite, calling it a little too experimental, only to reintroduce the exact same material 6 months later as his own bold new initiative in green materials, after it won an innovation grant. He'd even had the audacity to ask me to help him write the grant application. And I did it. I always did it. Why? The question pounded in my skull, a dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes. Why did I let it go on for so long? It's a question people ask, a question that dances on the edge of victim blaming. I think the answer is complicated. It was loyalty at first, A foolish, misplaced loyalty to a firm I believed in, to a legacy I thought I was helping to build. It was the sunk cost fallacy. I'd already invested so much of myself, my time, my creativity. To walk away felt like admitting that the entire investment had been a waste. And there was a part of me, a stubborn, arrogant part, that believed my work was so good, so undeniably brilliant, that eventually it would have to speak for itself. I thought competence was a force of nature, an undeniable truth that would eventually erode the political landscape. I was wrong. Competence without agency is just a resource to be exploited. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me, pulling me from the drowning depths of my own history. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, I picked it up, expecting a frantic, angry call from Jasper or Mr. Sterling. But it was a text message from Lena. Lena was my drafter, but that word doesn't do her justice. She was a brilliant young architect in her own right, with a mind like a steel trap and a quiet intensity that reminded me of myself 10 years ago. I'd taken her under my wing, mentored her, tried to shield her from the firm's toxic politics. I'd seen Jasper start the same routine with her, taking her detailed schematics and presenting them as his own minor adjustments. Her text read, "They're in a panic. Jasper can't open the primary Helios simulation files. He's telling everyone the server must have crashed." I know it didn't. Are you okay? A small, cold flame flickered to life in my chest. The files, of course he couldn't open them. They were encrypted with a key that only I possessed. It was a security measure I had put in place months ago, after I saw him trying to access my preliminary research for a different project. When he'd confronted me about it, I'd played dumb, blaming a new IT protocol. I told him it was above my pay grade. He'd accepted it, because he believed all technical matters were beneath his. Another text from Lena came through. He's trying to get IT to break the encryption. They're telling him it's a proprietary lock, and they can't do it without corrupting the entire data set. He's losing his mind. He just threw a stapler. I stared at the words on the screen. He threw a stapler. The image was so pathetic, so juvenile, that it almost made me laugh. The great Jasper Thorne, the visionary, the man of the people, defeated by a password he was too arrogant to ask for. And then the final text from Lena, the one that changed everything, the one that turned my despair into something cold, hard, and sharp. "Whatever you're doing, Phoebe, don't stop. You taught me that a blueprint is a promise. They broke their promise to you. Don't let them steal yours. A blueprint is a promise." I had said that to her in her first week. A design isn't just lines on a page. I told her, it's a promise to the client that you can build their dream. It's a promise to the world that you can do it safely and beautifully. And it's a promise to yourself that your vision is sound. They had broken every promise, and in doing so, they had released me from mine. I stood up, my knees cracking in protest. I walked out of the dark hallway and into my office. It was a small, spare room, but it was mine. On my desk was my personal laptop, a matte black machine that held the real heart of my work. The years of research, the failed experiments, the breakthrough calculations. I turned it on, the screen casting a cool blue light on my face. The despair was gone. The hurt was still there, a low background hum, but it was no longer the dominant frequency. Now the dominant frequency was resolve. A cold, clean, quiet resolve. I thought about Jasper's patronizing words. "You're more valuable behind the scenes." He was right, in a way. The most valuable work is always done behind the scenes. The foundation, the engine, the code. What he never understood is that the person who builds the engine is the only one who truly knows how to make it run. And I had just taken the keys. It wasn't about revenge. I whispered it to the empty room, trying to convince myself. It was about taking back what was mine. It was about finishing the promise. My promise. The next few months were a strange sort of purgatory. I lived off my savings, a buffer I'd obsessively built for a rainy day I never thought would be a monsoon. I didn't look for another job. I didn't call headhunters. I didn't update my portfolio. Instead, I worked. I holed up in my small apartment, turning it into a war room. The dining table became a sprawling desk, covered in sketches, printouts, and material samples. The quiet of my life was a stark contrast to the frantic noise I heard was consuming Sterling and Croft. Lena was my lifeline, my mole. We never spoke on the phone. We used a secure messaging app, our conversations a staccato of coded updates. She told me the Helios project had stalled completely. Jasper had tried to reverse engineer my designs from the presentation slides. He'd hired outside consultants, paying them exorbitant fees to try and crack the code of my work. They couldn't. The visual design was there, a beautiful empty shell, but the structural and sustainable systems that made it a living, breathing building were a black box. It was like having a photograph of a person and trying to replicate their soul. According to Lena, the firm was hemorrhaging money, trying to keep the client, Aether Developments, on the hook. Jasper was a whirlwind of excuses: supply chain issues, regulatory hurdles, unforeseen geological complications. He was a master of corporate jargon, but even he couldn't talk his way around a non-existent engineering plan. The client was getting restless. Their CEO, a man named Alistair Finch, was notorious for his impatience with incompetence. This was all part of the quiet plan I had been building in my head for years, a contingency plan I hoped I'd never have to use. It wasn't just about the encrypted files. That was just the lock on the door. My real foresight went deeper. For the last 2 years, I had meticulously documented every contribution I made to every major project. I used a personal, time-stamped digital notebook, logging every meeting, every design decision, every calculation. I had copies of early drafts, email chains where I had proposed the very ideas Jasper later claimed as his own, and server logs discreetly forwarded to my personal email that showed my access credentials were the only ones used to create and modify the core design files. It was a mountain of digital evidence. This is where I knew the lines got a little blurry. Legally speaking, could I use company data I'd emailed to myself? An HR handbook might say no. But my logic was different, perhaps debatable. It wasn't the company's data. It was a record of my work, my intellectual labor. I saw it as my personal insurance policy against the gaslighting I knew was a constant feature of my job. And then there was the subplot with Lena. My decision to mentor her wasn't entirely selfless. I saw myself in her, yes, but I also saw an ally. I saw someone who valued competence over charisma. I made sure she was the one assisting me on the Helios project, not just in drafting, but in the organizational logistics. She was the one who managed the project files, who organized the submission documents. She saw my name on everything before Jasper's assistant would meticulously replace it with his. She knew the truth because she had filed it away, day after day. When I left, I'd asked her for one thing: not to steal anything, not to sabotage. Just to keep a record, to be a witness. Her texts weren't just gossip, they were intel. She was my field agent, reporting on the enemy's collapsing morale. My primary secret weapon, however, wasn't data or allies. It was the work itself. The Helios blueprint that Jasper had was only phase 1. It was the what, the how. Phase 2 was where the real revolution was. It involved a proprietary modular construction method I'd developed, which I called biolattice integration. It used prefabricated biocomposite pods that could be grown in a lab and then locked together on-site, drastically reducing construction time and waste. It was the engine. Without it, the Helios Tower was just a pretty, impossibly expensive fantasy. I had filed for a provisional patent on the biolattice system under my own name 6 months before I quit. I'd used a small, independent patent lawyer, paying out of my own pocket. It was a gamble, a significant expense, but I had a gut feeling it was necessary. I told myself it was for a future side project, but a darker, more pragmatic part of me knew it was a life raft. Now in the quiet of my apartment, I wasn't just waiting, I was refining. I spent my days perfecting the biolattice methodology. I ran simulations on my powerful home-built computer, stress testing the materials, streamlining the growth process for the pods, cutting projected costs by another 10%. I was turning my life raft into a battleship. I also made a single quiet phone call, not to a lawyer, not to a headhunter, but to Marcus Thorne. No relation to Jasper, thankfully. Marcus was the head of a boutique real estate investment trust, a former client who had always seemed to see past Jasper's bluster. We'd worked on a smaller project together 2 years prior. I remembered a meeting where Jasper was trying to sell him on some flashy, expensive glass facade. Marcus had looked bored. He'd turned to me directly and asked, "Phoebe, what's the most efficient way to achieve the thermal insulation we need?" Jasper had tried to jump in, but Marcus had held up a hand. "Let her talk," he'd said. I'd given him a straight technical answer, and he'd nodded, a small, appreciative smile on his face. We ended up going with my more practical, less flashy solution, saving his project millions. When I called him, I kept it simple. I didn't complain about Jasper or the firm. I just told him I'd left Sterling and Croft to pursue an independent venture focused on next-generation sustainable design. I said, "Marcus, I just wanted to let you know I'm a free agent now." His response was immediate. "Good," he'd said. "It was about time. Let me know when you land. The world needs more builders, Phoebe, not more salesmen." That was it. I had planted a seed. I knew that when the time was right, it would bloom. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months. I became nocturnal, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose. I was building my case, my company, my future, all from a single spare bedroom. It felt like I was constructing a quiet coup, assembling my forces in secret while the king sat on his hollow throne, oblivious to the fact that the foundations were being systematically removed from under him. People might say it was a long time to endure the disrespect, to wait so long to make a move. They might call it weakness. I don't see it that way. I see it as gathering data. I see it as a long, slow, strategic burn. You don't take on an empire with a single emotional outburst. You do it with patience, with a flawless plan, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have the one thing they can't replicate: the truth. And my truth was now patented, documented, and ready to be deployed. It wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a new reality, one where my name was attached to my work, a reality I was now ready to launch. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was unassuming, with a simple subject line: inquiry, regarding sustainable design. It wasn't from a recruiter or a small firm. It was from Alistair Finch, the CEO of Athelred Developments, the man Jasper was currently failing so spectacularly to impress. My heart didn't leap. It settled. A deep, cold calm washed over me. This was it, the first move. The email was brief and to the point. Mr. Finch had been made aware, through industry back channels, that I was the principal architect behind the original Helios Tower concept. He noted that his internal teams were impressed with the vision of the design Sterling and Croft had presented, but they had significant, and I quote, "viability concerns regarding the structural and economic models, or the lack thereof." He concluded by asking if I would be available for a discreet conversation to discuss my original, unadulterated vision for the project. I waited exactly 3 hours before replying. I didn't want to seem desperate, but I also didn't want to seem disengaged. My reply was even shorter than his email. "Mr. Finch, I would be delighted. Please let me know what time works for you." I was in his office 48 hours later. Ethelred's headquarters were the antithesis of Sterling and Croft. Where my old firm was all dark wood, old money, and whispered conversations, this place was glass, steel, and light. It hummed with a quiet, focused energy. Alistair Finch was a tall, lean man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to analyze everything with a terrifying level of precision. There was no small talk. He gestured for me to sit, and his first words were, "Tell me about biolattice integration." He hadn't just heard rumors, he had done his homework. For the next 2 hours, I didn't just talk. I presented. I walked him through the entire Helios concept, not as a building, but as a living ecosystem. I showed him the science behind the biocomposite pods, the logistics of the modular construction, the proprietary energy recycling systems I had designed that would make the tower not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative. I opened my laptop and showed him the simulations, the cost-benefit analyses, the patent filings. I laid my entire arsenal on his table. He listened intently, never interrupting, his eyes fixed on the data. When I was finished, he was silent for a full minute, just staring at the screen. I could feel the entire weight of my future hanging in that silence. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me. Not at my designs, but at me. So, Sterling and Croft are trying to sell me a Ferrari with a lawnmower engine, he said, a ghost of a smile on his face. That's a generous way of putting it, I replied. I'd say they're selling you a picture of a Ferrari. He laughed, a sharp, barking sound. I like you, Phoebe. You don't waste words. He leaned forward again, his expression all business. I'm not just going to give you the Helios project. That's thinking too small. I'm going to give you a division. I want to launch Ethelred Sustainable Designs, and I want you to be its president. You'll have full autonomy, your own budget, your own team. You build whatever you want, starting with Helios. The only condition is that your name is on the door. I'm not sure what he saw on my face. Shock, relief, the tectonic plates of my entire professional life shifting beneath my feet. I simply nodded, unable to form words. Yes, I managed to say, yes. The fallout at Sterling and Croft was not something I witnessed firsthand. It was something I experienced through a series of increasingly panicked text messages from Lena. The first move was a quiet one. Athelred's legal team sent a single sterile letter to Sterling and Croft, formally withdrawing their letter of intent for the Helios project, citing a failure to demonstrate a viable path to execution. Lena's text, the letter just landed. Sterling is in his office with Jasper. The door is closed, but I heard shouting, something about professional malpractice. Panic began to ripple through the old firm. Jasper, stripped of his prize project, apparently tried to deflect. Lena reported that he was telling everyone that Athelred was an unstable partner, that their funding was shaky, that he had been the one to advise pulling out. He was trying to spin the narrative, to paint himself as the wise strategist who had saved the firm from a bad deal. But the walls were closing in. He had promised the partners the moon, and now he couldn't even deliver a bucket of rocks. 2 weeks later, we made our move. Athelred's PR department, a well-oiled machine of corporate warfare, launched a coordinated press blitz, a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal, a feature article in Metropolis magazine, a press release sent to every major industry news outlet. The announcement was simple and devastating. Athelred Developments launches revolutionary, sustainable design division, headed by visionary architect Phoebe Lang. The release went on to detail the flagship project, the Helios Tower, a groundbreaking self-sustaining building made possible by a patented new technology called biolattice integration. My technology, my name. My face was everywhere. A crisp professional headshot looking directly into the camera, confident, calm, in control. Lena's next text was just a picture. It was the cover of Metropolis magazine, sitting on her desk. My face was on it. Underneath, the headline, The Quiet Architect, How Phoebe Lang is Building the Future One Living Block at a Time. The second part of her text read, Jasper just saw it. I don't think I've ever seen a man turn that color before. He's not speaking, he's just vibrating. The silent takeover was complete. I hadn't fired a shot. I hadn't made a single angry phone call or sent a single accusatory email. I had simply done what I had always done. I had done the work. The difference was, this time I had signed my name to it. And by doing so, I had revealed that the Emperor of Sterling and Croft had no clothes. The panic I had imagined him feeling was no longer an abstraction. It was real. It was palpable. And from the quiet, light-filled space of my new office, it was a distant, satisfying sound, like the rumble of a storm that had already passed me by. The magazine cover was the tipping point. It wasn't just an announcement, it was a signal. It was a lighthouse beam, cutting through the fog of Jasper's excuses, and the ships that had been loyal to me, not to the firm, began to change course. The first call was from Marcus Thorne. I didn't even have to say hello. Phoebe, he said, his voice warm and full of wry amusement. I see you've landed. His own multi-million-dollar downtown revitalization project had been languishing at Sterling and Croft for months. Jasper, without me to do the actual work, had been feeding him a steady diet of delays and nonsense. Marcus was a man who prized momentum above all else. Within 24 hours, his legal team had invoked a performance clause in his contract and officially terminated his relationship with Sterling and Croft. His next call was to me. "I want to be your first client, Phoebe. I don't care what it costs. I want to work with the builder, not the salesman." His very public departure created a fissure in the firm's client base. He was a bellwether, a respected name in the industry. His move gave other dissatisfied clients the permission they needed to jump ship. Within a month, 3 other major accounts had followed him, all of them citing project delays and a lack of confidence in the current leadership. They didn't all come to me, but that didn't matter. The point wasn't to poach them all, the point was that they were leaving. The exodus had begun. Sterling and Croft was no longer a fortress. It was a sieve. Lena, who had submitted her resignation the day my new role was announced, was now sitting across from me in my new office, helping me set up the division. She was my first hire. She told me the atmosphere at the old firm was funereal. The partners were in closed-door meetings all day. The revenue projections for the next 2 quarters had collapsed. The firm that had felt so invincible, so monolithic, was proving to be a house of cards, and I had quietly removed the one card that was holding the whole thing up. Then came the desperate countermove. My phone rang one evening. The caller ID said Sterling and Croft. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't Jasper, it was Mr. Sterling himself. His voice, which was usually a booming, confident baritone, was thin and strained. "Phoebe," he said, without any preamble, "let's not mince words. We made a mistake." I stayed silent. The silence was a weapon I had learned to wield with precision. It forced the other person to fill the void, to reveal their hand. "Jasper has been a disappointment," he continued, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He misrepresented his role in a number of key projects. We are taking steps to rectify the situation." I still said nothing. I just listened to the sound of his breathing, the faint static on the line. "We want you to come back," he said, the desperation finally breaking through his carefully constructed composure. "We'll make you a full partner. Name your price. We'll double what Athelred is paying you. The Helios project, it's yours. We'll issue a public correction. Whatever you want." I let the offer hang in the air for a moment. The offer that, a year ago, I would have given anything to hear. The validation I had craved for a decade. Now it felt like an insult. It was a bribe, not an apology. It was an attempt to buy back the engine they had thrown away, not a recognition of the driver. I finally spoke, my voice calm and even. "Mr. Sterling, I'm not an asset to be bought or sold, and my name is no longer for sale. But we need you," he stammered. "The firm, I know," I said, and the simplicity of those 2 words held all the power in the world. "I have to go now. I have a building to design." I hung up the phone. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt balanced. The power shift was complete. It hadn't happened in a shouting match or a dramatic boardroom showdown. It had happened in a series of quiet, deliberate choices. My choice to leave. My choice to protect my work. My choice to build something new instead of trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken. Jasper always said I was more valuable behind the scenes. He was right. From behind the scenes, I had dismantled his entire world, and now I was ready to step onto the stage I had built for myself. The final act didn't play out in an office or a boardroom. It happened fittingly under the bright lights of the National Architecture Guild Awards. It was 6 months after I had joined Athelred. The Helios project, fast-tracked with a budget that would have made Mr. Sterling weep, was already breaking ground. But tonight the award was for the concept itself. The Visionary Award for Sustainable Innovation. This time my name was on the nomination. It was the only name. I went with Alistair Finch and my small growing team, which now included Lena as my director of operations. Walking into that grand ballroom felt like stepping into a different dimension. For years I had attended these events as a nameless +1 on the Sterling and Croft table, watching Jasper go up to the stage to accept awards for my work. I'd clap politely from the back, a ghost in a cocktail dress. Tonight my table was at the front. When they called my name, the applause felt different. It was for me. I walked up to the podium, the heavy crystal award feeling solid and real in my hands. I looked out at the sea of faces, the titans of my industry. I saw Mr. Sterling at his table in the middle of the room, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. And then I saw Jasper. He was sitting at the very back at a table sponsored by some minor materials supplier. He wasn't a visionary anymore. He was just a guy in a rented tuxedo, trying to network his way back to relevance. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no anger in his face, just a hollowed-out confusion, the look of a man who still couldn't comprehend how the rules of the game had changed on him. My speech was short. I thanked Athelred for their trust. I thanked my team for their brilliance, and I ended with a simple statement. A good design isn't just about how a building looks, I said. It's about how it functions. It's about integrity, not just structural integrity, but moral integrity. It's about building a future that is not only sustainable, but also true. Later at the reception, he approached me. It was inevitable. He moved with a hesitant, shambling gait that was completely alien to the slick predator I had known. He had a glass of scotch in his hand, and it trembled slightly. "Phoebe," he started, his voice raspy. That was a hell of a speech. I just looked at him, waiting. I didn't owe him an easy exit. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I never meant for, I always valued your contributions." The lie was so old, so practiced, that he probably almost believed it himself. But I wasn't the same person who used to swallow those lies. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list his betrayals. I just gave him the one thing he could never reclaim, the truth, delivered in his own words. "I know you valued my contributions, Jasper," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the cold weight of a steel beam. "You told me so yourself, many times. Some people are just more valuable behind the scenes." It turns out I just needed to own the scenes. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. The moment he understood that I was not just quoting him, but passing judgment, he had no reply. There was nothing left to say. I gave him a small, final nod, turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of a crowded room, a relic in a world that had moved on. 2 weeks later, Lena forwarded me an internal memo from a friend still at Sterling and Croft. Jasper Thorne had been officially terminated, his position eliminated in a strategic restructuring. Mr. Sterling had been moved into a chairman emeritus role, a polite corporate term for being kicked upstairs into irrelevance. The firm was a shell of its former self, a cautionary tale whispered at industry cocktail parties. My vindication wasn't in their failure. It was in my success. It was in the view from my new office, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was in the energy of my team, a collection of brilliant minds like Lena who were there because they believed in the work, not the politics. It was the feeling of signing a blueprint, a massive, world-changing blueprint, and seeing my name, clear and bold, in the title block. President, Athelred Sustainable Designs. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. The world was finally in balance. In my office, on the wall opposite my desk, I have two things framed. On the left is the cover of Metropolis magazine, with my face on it. It's a reminder of what happens when you finally claim your own story. On the right is a small, simple piece of paper. It's the original champagne-stained napkin from that day in the boardroom, the one I'd scribbled the first, rough sketch of Helios on 3 years ago. I'd fished it out of my bag that night I quit, a relic of a past self. It's a reminder of where I came from, a reminder that the biggest ideas often start in the quietest, most overlooked places. They say success is the best revenge, but I don't think that's true. It was never about revenge, it was about correction. The system at my old firm was broken. It rewarded the wrong things, charisma over competence, politics over product. I didn't destroy them. They were a house built on a rotten foundation. I just stopped being the beam that held it all up. When I walked away, it simply collapsed under the weight of its own dysfunction. My story isn't unique. Maybe the details are the blueprints, the patents, the world of architecture, but the feeling isn't. The feeling of being erased, of having your work claimed by someone else, of being told you're more valuable when you're invisible. That is a universal language. It happens in every office, in every industry, in every corner of the world where credit is currency and visibility is power. So if you are watching this and you feel like a ghost in your own career, know this: your work matters, your contribution has value, and you do not need anyone else's permission to claim it. You don't have to scream or fight or burn the whole building down. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to quietly pick up your tools, your talent, your truth, and walk out the door. And then you go and you build your own house. A house where you are not the hidden foundation, but the architect, the builder, and the resident, all at once. A place where your name is on the door. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please do me a favor and hit that like button, because it tells the algorithm that stories of quiet strength are worth sharing. Leave a comment below if you've ever had a Jaspers in your life. It's important to know we're not alone. Share this with anyone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button for more stories about reclaiming your own power. You are more valuable than they want you to believe. Never forget that.